Hello there. Welcome back. Tonight, we're traveling back to a time of velvet ropes, polished boots, and uneasy crowds. One of my favorite topics. We'll let the world outside fall quiet as we drift gently into the early 19th century. That's the 1800s. So close your eyes and let's go to France just after the storm of revolution has begun to settle. The guillotine was long gone, but its echo remains. We begin with a man who's old, tired, but shrewd. His name is Louis XVIII. He's the brother of the late king, Louis XVI. Louis XVI, Louis XVI, Louis XVI. Louis XVI was the man who was married to Marie Antoinette and was executed during the revolution. So this is his brother, Louis XVIII. Louis XVIII was not crowned in splendor and grand ceremony. He returned to France in 1814 after years of exile, watching and waiting as Napoleon fell and rose again. Louis XVIII was called the Desired, but his arrival was not a triumphant parade. It was a balancing act. Louis XVIII had to please the nobles who wanted all the old ways returned to them, and the people he also had to please. They had lasted through the revolution. They had tasted what life could be like without a king, and they couldn't forget it very easily. So, King Louis XVIII walked a tightrope between the past and the future. He issued a new constitution for the people, for the people, for the people, new constitution for the people. It allowed for a parliament and little bits of liberty and freedom. But the constitution also preserved the crown. It preserved the crown. He wore silk and he dressed like a king. But he was still uncertain of his place. His mind was sharp. He was a smart king. He knew that in order to keep peace, he had to compromise. He had to compromise. He had to compromise. He ruled for 10 years, from 1814 to 1824, with only one interruption, and that was Napoleon's last gasp. The 100 days, the 100 days, the 100 days. But even then, Louis fled quietly and returned just as quietly. And when he died in 1824, his throne passed to his brother. It passed to his brother, to his brother, to his brother. Charles X. Charles X was his brother, Charles X. Charles X was not like Louis XVIII. Charles was proud, where Louis had been cautious. Where Louis had adapted and compromised, Charles tried to turn back the clock. He believed very, very deeply, in divine right. That meant that he believed that God chose kings, and therefore, as God's chosen, you had to do whatever he said, because he was kind of like a representative chosen. He was crowned, unlike his brother, he was crowned in a full-on ceremony. Full-on ceremony. It was huge and gaudy, and it had all sorts of tradition in it, and the people had changed. They didn't so much like this or expect this of their king any longer. On top of that, he rolled back reforms that the revolution had brought. He compensated nobles who had lost land during the revolution. He gave them land back, and he gave them more power to the Catholic Church, and he started censoring the press. He censored the press, censored the press, censored the press, he censored the press. Slowly, resentment built and simmered in the people, in the salons and cafes of Paris and other cities, in whispers and quiet meetings. People met and complained, and then a final spark came in July of 1830, July of 1830. Charles X issued the July ordinances. He suspended the press, no longer just censoring the press, he suspended the press, and he dissolved part of the government. And he restricted voting even further. This time, with the July ordinances, the people had had enough. They rose once more. They took to the streets of Paris. Students, workers, veterans of Napoleon's wars. They all rallied and fought, and they drove the king away. They drove the king away. They drove the king away. Charles X fled to France, just as his brother had, which is very interesting because kings in England, when there's uprisings, they usually fled to France, and so now a French king is fleeing to England. In his place, once he was now in exile, that was the end of the Bourbon Restoration. In his place, a new king came, Louis-Philippe. And in its place rose a new king, Louis-Philippe. He was called the Citizen King. He was more like Louis XVIII, compromised. He understood how to keep peace, at least in comparison to Charles X. And that is the two brothers of the Bourbon Restoration. I hope you sleep and remember the Bourbon Restoration and the personalities of kings and how they can change how the people see them, depending on the kind of king that they are. I hope you dream of France in the 19th century and think about how these tensions of kings rising and falling in the once powerful kingdom of France, and them and the rebels executing the king, and the king of France having been executed in the revolution. This, along with Napoleon's wars and the revolution wars that followed, were part of the tensions in the backdrop of the 100 years before World War I. If you have a comment that you'd like to share about a time, a place, a king, a queen, or a war that you'd like me to do a video on, please leave a comment. Let me know.